Okay, so for today, my name is Valentina, and I'll be discussing to you guys about preparedness, Bandura's social learning theory, and animal research. Okay, so let's begin by what is exactly preparedness? Well, we're all really familiar with learning. Now, learning has been highly studied, is really structured, but it's gonna have its own exceptions, and preparedness is one of those. Now, we can understand preparedness as the idea that organisms have innate associations that help them to survive. In other words, the concept explains why some associations are more easily learned than others, and I'm gonna follow this by some examples. So definitely the best example for preparedness would be taste aversion. So in taste aversion, we have a subject, and the subject is going to ingest a particular food for the first time. He's gonna eat it. Now, if the subject becomes ill after eating that kind of food, it is going to be expected that it won't consume it again, because now he makes the association that this is gonna make him sick, and in order to survive, he cannot eat it. Now, we also have to keep in mind that the reason why taste aversion is so effective, it's because it's not going to require several stimulus response pairings in order to develop an aversive response. Also, it's going to create that aversive response even if the food was not the cause for making the subject sick. And this is because in order to survive, organisms tend to they tend to overvalue internal associations over external ones. Phobias are another great example for preparedness. And a way of thinking about these is the organism is going to make an association between the phobia and that feeling of fear, that feeling of, oh, that thing in particular represents danger, so I must avoid it. And then phobias are incredibly easy to develop. That's why they're part of preparedness, because developing phobias are going to help you survive. So here we have a cat. A cat has never seen a dog before. Then he sees the dog and he notices this dog is not really friendly. He's going to associate that dog with that danger, that fear. And now he's going to develop a phobia against dogs, because he knows that if he avoids them, he will survive. Now let's think about the way preparedness can be non-adaptive. Let's pretend that this friend right here is a human. Now our ancestors pretty much before used to respond to stress by a fight or flight response. So we have the stressor right here, and then once he faces the stress, what is he gonna do? Fight or flight? However, nowadays, humans have different kinds of stressors. Now we have academic tests, we have economic problems. So, fight or flight response is not gonna be exactly helpful in these sorts of situations, and then that's how preparedness can learn to be non-adaptive. Okay, now following with the second topic of this list, we're gonna take a look at Bandura's social learning theory. The foundation of this learning theory began with Bandura's famous experiment of Bobo the doll. The experiment was done on children aged 3 to 6 years old. The experiment was divided into 3 groups: first group, second group, and control group. First group watched a series of videos of adults being aggressive towards Bobo the doll. The second group watched videos of adults being either friendly or pretty much ignoring the doll. And the control group was not exposed to any videos. However, all children were taken to a room in which they will see pretty attractive toys. And as soon as the children started playing with those toys, the researcher told them that they will have to leave because those toys were reserved for other children. And that was made with the purpose of triggering children's aggression, because later they will be taken to the next room in which they will find Bobo the doll and some other slightly more aggressive toys. Now let's just pretend that who we have here is Bobo. Conclusions determine that children who observed the violent behavior will treat Bobo way more aggressively, just like they saw on the videos, versus the other children that were not exposed to those degrees of violence. Our biggest contribution here will be the violence can be learned through observations. That is what Bandura concluded after his experiment. Then controversial findings like these just open the way to questions like, does the violence that we perceive through media is influencing our learning? Is it somehow increasing our aggressive behavior? Are we learning this from media? Nevertheless, before we freak out, we gotta consider the ecological validity of Bandura's experiment. We have to think that it is highly unlikely to have a situation like that in real life. Also, children that were participants on this experiment were neither punished nor reinforced after their actions. Also, their actions had no consequences, whereas on a real life situation, if you were to behave aggressively, usually you'll be aware about the consequences and the ethics that are on the actions that you're doing at the moment. It is also important to keep in mind that both adults and children are usually going to follow socially acceptable actions, since these are the ones that tend to be rewarded and promoted by society. And finally, we gotta keep in mind that a lot of the things involving aggression they're going to depend on the characteristics of the subject, and also, just like I said before, the consequences of his actions and what is actually being reinforced by this person's society. Now, for the last part, I will briefly discuss about animals and research. And the question here is whether or not doing research on animals is a justifiable mean for the sake of science. Especially keeping in mind that some of these procedures can be painful for the animal. And it is important to consider that some studies are really hard to perform on humans or computer programs. Also, when it comes to studying humans, they have a lot of confounding variables within that, things like previous experiences. Therefore done in animals, because although animals and humans are very different, we still share pretty similar psychological traits and physical characteristics. Luckily, the negative past of animal research has given way for more ethical entities and ethical codes. Entities like the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committees, which take the job to regulate and create the laws for animal research. Not only that, but also researchers that use animals for their experiments follow the rule of the 3 R's, which stand for replacement, reduction, and refinement. 3 R's come as alternatives, alternative options for researchers when it comes to doing experiments with animals. So in this case, replacement will be to replace or avoid the use of animals and go instead for maybe looking at possibilities with humans or even computer programs. Should make sure that the population that is being used for the experiment is the one that is strictly necessary. So no more or no less than what is strictly needed in order to protect the safety of those animals being used, especially if there are painful procedures in the case. Refinement makes sure that painful procedures are the least painful they can be, and they're also going to make sure that the animal receives the dignified treatment that it deserves from its birth, from his or her service until their death. One of the most important things to keep in mind is that animal research nowadays is extremely different from what it used to be. These animals get the supervision that they deserve, and actually research on them is only used as a last resource after all other options have been assessed and declined. Then lastly, it must be mentioned that the service that animals have provided for humanity is what keeps contributing all these crucial discoveries for the benefit of all of us.